As I packed away the echoes of my past, I began to wonder, could downsizing truly unlock a vibrant new future instead of sealing away my memories? As I continued to sort through the remnants of my life in that family home, the bittersweet memories flooded back like a gentle tide. Each box I opened contained the echoes of laughter from holidays spent with my children and the intimate quiet of serene evenings spent in our garden, where I often lost track of time while tending to the roses. Packing up my beloved library, filled with books that transported me to different worlds, was particularly emotional. It was as if I was not just packing belongings but also sealing away parts of my identity. I vividly recall the gatherings with the kids, how the kitchen would come alive with the aroma of pot roast and chocolate cake, while the living room erupted with joyous chatter. I clutched my heart as I delicately wrapped each book or knick-knack, picturing where they might find their new place in my smaller yet warmly inviting apartment. Would these items still hold the same significance once I left the home they had always inhabited? With every item I carefully packed into boxes, the initial fears of downsizing crept in. I worried about whether I would lose my independence or, even worse, feel isolated in my new community. As I paced the rooms that held decades of love and life, I couldn't shake the thought that I was abandoning more than just bricks and mortar. I was leaving behind a sanctuary filled with our family's history. But then, I remembered the comforting conversations I had shared with my friend Evelyn. Her journey through downsizing illuminated the reality that despite fear and sadness, there is also profound freedom and the power of choice. She often emphasized that the decision to downsize was not dictated by anyone but ourselves, and it was a process filled with opportunities for fresh beginnings rather than restrictions. Reflecting on how actively choosing my next chapter might empower me, I found new clarity. Nearly 90% of seniors express a preference to age in place, but for me, the real crux lay in shifting how we define our living spaces. I realized that my home was not just about its physical walls, but also about the connections and community we build around us. Imagining afternoon teas with Evelyn, or gardening side by side with Henry, who always has a story or two to share alongside his dependable handiwork, began to soothe my apprehensions. Instead of envisioning isolation, I started to see vibrant community living, a network of support that I could engage with actively. I felt a surge of excitement at the thought of my new enclave, where familiar friendships could flourish and new ones could blossom. As I loaded the boxes into the car, Henny came by with a smile and his trademark laid-back attitude. He always had a knack for easing tension with just his presence. "Hey, Mabel," he called out. "Need a hand with anything?" In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The world around me seemed to shift from one filled with fear to one bursting with potential. Under Henry's guidance, I began to appreciate how downscaling did not mean sacrificing what mattered most. It was about making room for what I truly desired. His laid-back philosophy of embracing change rather than resisting it made me see this transition through a different lens. Together, we built a friendship that I felt would sustain me through the challenges ahead. Just as I was about to close the door one last time on my old life, I took a deep breath, absorbing the thick air of nostalgia. I thanked the space for all the laughter, the heartache, and the undulating journey it had witnessed. Saying goodbye was purely a ritual, a symbolic gesture of honor rather than a final farewell. I allowed myself to be vulnerable as I recalled the tears shed, the years lived, and the unshakable history woven into the very fabric of that home. The transition to my new place felt simultaneously like a loss and an exhilarating leap into an unwritten future. I stepped outside, exhilarated by the journey ahead. What would this next chapter look like? Would it continue to be filled with laughter, friendships, and a sense of belonging? As I stood with my feet planted firmly in the present, surrounded by boxes filled with the stories of my past, I realized change is not an enemy to be feared, but a powerful catalyst for growth. Empowered by my thoughts and inspired by the support of my friends, I began to see downsizing not as a diminishment, but an intentional step into a more fulfilling life, a celebration of what's to come rather than a lament for what once was. The prospect of uncharted territory filled me with resolve. How could I channel this energy into creating a vibrant new home? The following weeks were a blend of excitement and trepidation as I settled into my new apartment, which felt foreign and comforting in equal measure. The smaller space was a canvas ready for my personal touch, yet I was still overwhelmed by the sheer volume of decisions that lay ahead. No longer did I have the expansive shelves and rooms of my old home to house every precious trinket and book. Each item needed to earn its place in this new chapter of my life. And so I began the delicate task of sorting through my belongings once again, allowing myself to reflect on memories tied to each piece. This process was not just logical, but also therapeutic. It invited me to consider what truly brought me joy, compelling me to cherish not just the items themselves, but the stories that accompanied them. Each keeper's choice felt empowering rather than burdensome, and with each decision, I felt more rooted in this new journey. One sunny afternoon, as I sipped tea on my patio that overlooked a small garden, Evelyn came by, her bright scarf fluttering in the gentle breeze. She plopped down beside me, her eyes twinkling with enthusiasm as she shared stories about her own downsizing experience. "Darling, let me tell you," she said, gesturing as if directing the course of our conversation, "letting go can be so freeing. I found a vintage purse that reminded me of my first trip to Paris, and I had to decide whether to keep it or let it go. I ultimately placed it among a few select pieces that encapsulate my journey. It's all about curating your life." Her words resonated deeply within me. We were not simply discarding items, but making conscious choices about how we wanted to live moving forward. Each item chosen was a manifestation of a story I wanted to embrace and carry with me. As I wandered through my apartment, I began to envision how I could transform this space into a reflection of my essence. I started separating memorabilia into categories. The must-keeps, which included a photo album from my children's youth, and the let-go items, like an aging lamp that had long since stopped working. I made it a point to share some of these decisions with my family, inviting them into this journey, not just for their input, but also to share precious moments tied to our collective past. I even digitized many of my handwritten recipes, preserving memories of my late husband standing by my side, stirring the pot while the home filled with rich aromas. Perhaps it was the fear of losing connections that ignited the warmth of my resolve, but what emerged was an urgency to safeguard the memories that truly resonated with me and shared my journey beyond material goods. Evelyn's cheerful voice cut through my contemplations. "Why don't we host a little gathering here next week? Once you are settled fully, we can christen your new home with dear friends and laughter." At that moment, I realized how critical a sense of community would be in this transition. Slowly, I began to jot down a list of neighbors I wanted to invite. Henry, of course, for his effortless conversation and reassuring spirit, and others I had yet to connect with, who lived just a stone's throw away. In my new apartment complex, I felt a buzz of anticipation pulse through me at the thought of rehashing old stories and laughter, bridging new friendships with the ties of our common experiences. The prospect of filling my home with chatter, warmth, and clarity made the daunting task ahead seem more manageable and even enjoyable. Having faced my fear of downsizing, I realized that often the most challenging and essential change began with letting go. I found solace in the research I had done. Studies showed that decluttering could enhance mental health and alleviate feelings of anxiety associated with aging. This was a revelation that filled me with excitement. Each item I decided to give away or repurpose was not just a decision toward minimalism. It was a bold affirmation of what it meant to live with purpose. I began to gather the items I would donate, visualizing how they would find warmth and utility in new homes, just as I was seeking within my own. Instead of feeling desolate, I felt empowered as I realized I was actively participating in the cycle of life, creating space for new memories while pouring my love into those that mattered most. As the day of the gathering approached, a delightful, nervous energy danced around me. I spent hours preparing my apartment and making sure every crevice echoed warmth and invitation. I even called Henry to attend, enlisting his help to fix the nagging creak in the floorboards that had been keeping me awake at night. He arrived promptly, tools in hand, and that familiar friendly smile plastered across his face. "You know, Mabel," he chuckled as he expertly laid out his tools, "this transition, it's an opportunity, not an obstacle. Remember, the wooden floor creaks because it's adjusting to a new weight, just like all of us." His reassuring words made me giggle as he quickly repaired the bothersome boards, his easy approach to life wrapping around me like a warm blanket. That evening, when friends began to arrive with dishes in hand and excitement in their voices, I basked in a moment of pure joy. The warm light of my new home flickered against the walls as jubilant laughter and heartfelt stories filled the air, stories of a past enriched by each connection. I roamed among the guests, savoring the flavor of old memories combined with the thrill of new ones, feeling a sense of belonging bloom within my heart. This gathering illustrated not just my new space, but also a redefined concept of home, where comfort came from shared connections more than physical walls. Every laugh, every embrace, forged new memories, painting my new chapter in vibrant colors. How could I have ever feared the unknown? When I finally stood back and surveyed my newly decorated apartment, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Each corner seemed to whisper stories of my past, yet also beckoned with the promise of fresh experiences. Family photos hung smiling from the walls, the vibrant colors of my collection of scarves draped across the back of a chair, and a carefully chosen plant breathed life into the room. Reflecting on Evelyn's advice, I realized I was indeed curating my life, transforming a simple living space into a heartfelt reflection of who I had become and who I aspired to be. This newfound persona wasn't merely constructed from belongings. It was crafted from treasured memories and intentional choices that offered me great empowerment. With every item carefully placed, I felt a part of me rooting itself in this new soil, nurturing my both past and future. In the days leading up to the gathering, I started to notice more intricacies of everyday life in my new community. The friendly waves from neighbors now came with a sense of familiarity, and each small interaction buoyed my spirits. I stumbled upon a local book club that met in the quaint cafe down the block, a perfect place for me to dive into conversations about literature while mingling with fellow book lovers. As I sipped on my chamomile tea and engaged in intellectual discussions, I experienced a thrilling realization. I had not just moved to a different apartment, I had relocated to a lively ecosystem rich in interaction and shared experiences. The effort to seek out these activities reminded me of the adage, the more you engage, the more you receive. Meanwhile, Evelyn became not just a neighbor, but a friend I developed a bond with over our regular tea afternoons. One day, as we laughed over animated stories involving her grandchildren, she imparted wisdom about the importance of social engagement. "Mabel, dear," she smiled, "studies show that having a strong social circle can improve mental health, perhaps even extend our longevity." Her words struck a chord within me. If I had any doubts about taking the leap into community life, they evaporated like morning dew. I started to realize that cultivating connections would act as a cohesive thread through my tapestry of memories, and through that process, those friendships would become my anchors. That reflection prompted me to consider how I could integrate my love for books with my goal of belonging. I decided to start a small book-sharing club among the residents in my apartment complex. Drawing from my years spent as a librarian, I began sketching out an inviting flyer that would announce our initial gathering. "Let's share stories and snacks," was the slogan I settled on, fueled by the excitement of introducing fellow bookworms to one another. As I distributed the flyers, enthusiasm bubbled inside me. This was not merely about exchanging books. It was about forging relationships, about inviting others into my new chapter, while weaving theirs into mine. As the day of the book club approached, I experienced a pit of nervousness mixed with sheer anticipation. Despite my earlier confidence, what if no one showed? I drew strength from the memories of my gathering, reminding myself that I had successfully built connections before and that I merely needed the courage to continue doing so. That evening, as I walked to the community lounge among a flurry of prepared treats, I noticed people already engaged in conversations, animated discussions that echoed through the hall. The room was alive. I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a bright smile as I stepped in, seeing familiar faces from my earlier encounters alongside newcomers, each eager to share their own tales and perspectives. The book-sharing club proved to be a delight, transforming my initial jitters into joy as laughter and animated discussions filled the air. I listened intently to each member's take on the book we had chosen, a narrative driven by nostalgia and belonging, sparking stories from every facet of their lives. We bonded over shared interests, differing opinions, and even encouraged each other to explore genres we might otherwise overlook. In that bustling room, I realized I was nurturing not only my own relationships but also serving as a conduit for connection among others. As I looked around, I felt that the threads of our lives were weaving a beautiful tapestry that represented the rich diversity of experiences we all brought to this space. In those moments, it became abundantly clear that home was not merely a physical space filled with my belongings. Instead, it was the connections I fostered and the laughter we shared over a cup of tea or an engaging book. My new apartment was taking shape, not just with furniture and decor, but with warmth and camaraderie that turned this new place into a sanctuary. Our conversations and shared stories stitched the newly coined fabric of my life together, each encounter offering an opportunity to learn, connect, and grow. I felt invigorated, a refreshing sense of resilience washing over me as I grasped that I was contributing to something larger than myself, a knitted family carved from shared experiences. What better way to redefine home than through the friendships forged right at my doorstep? As the weeks turned into months, I began to dive deeper into what it truly meant to call this new space home. One afternoon, inspired by a wave of nostalgia, I decided to cook my late grandmother's famous apple pie, a cherished family recipe passed down through generations. Standing in my compact yet cozy kitchen, I pulled out my mixing bowls and freshly sourced apples from the local farmer's market. The familiar scents of cinnamon and vanilla wafted through the air, instantly igniting memories of family gatherings where laughter and love intermingled. With each step of the process, I was reminded that home transcends mere walls and furnishings. It is about the warmth we cultivate through shared experiences, particularly around a table where stories unfold like the ingredients in a cherished recipe. As the golden-crusted pie baked in the oven, I took a moment to appreciate the ambiance of my new home, painted in warm tones and filled with personal touches. I realized how liberating it was to let go of the burdens that once came with excess belongings. With less stuff, I had created not just a physically inviting environment, but a space where memories could breathe freely. One by one, I began to see my belongings for what they were: instruments of storytelling. Certain items sparked cherished tales, like an old teapot from my mother that sat proudly on the shelf, or vivid scarves that adorned my chairs, telling tales that warmed my heart. The realization dawned upon me: home is not found within the boundaries of what we own, but rather in the emotional connections we nurture throughout our lifetimes. In sharing the pie with my neighbors later that evening during an impromptu gathering in the lounge, I experienced firsthand the profound effect of simple, warm gestures. As we savored its flavors, each bite seemed to incubate stories of their lives. Evelyn recounted her childhood Christmases, and Henry shared tales of fixing up old houses filled with family laughter. In that bustling kitchen, I grasped the significance of feeding both body and spirit. My once solitary mornings were now punctuated by these glowing encounters, and I realized that the act of sharing my grandmother's pie became an offering of love that extended beyond my apartment's walls. With each passing day, my understanding of home began to evolve further. I embraced the simplicity of my life, and with that simplicity came a newfound freedom that allowed me to relish every moment. The chaotic rush that often defined my previous lifestyle had been traded for a quiet serenity, where I could savor each small pleasure, be it a quiet moment with a book or friendly conversations with neighbors. I began to practice mindfulness in my daily routine, taking the time to simply sip my tea and watch the trees sway outside my window or listening to laughter from the corridor. These rituals became anchors in my new life, grounding me in a sense of belonging that had once felt elusive. During one of our community gatherings, I was struck by a comment made by Henry. "Mabel, he said with that warm smile of his. "The best part of growing older is realizing we have more choices than ever before." His words resonated deeply as I reflected on how, in downsizing, I had not lost something precious. Rather, I had gained the freedom to choose what would fill my days. Each decision, be it organizing a community event, trading books, or simply taking a stroll, was now rooted in personal intent rather than external obligation. Suddenly, my retirement wasn't simply a phase of inactivity. It was an exhilarating opportunity to embrace life more fully, discovering what truly mattered to me. With this new perspective on life and home, I felt empowered not only to share my journey with others, but also to invite them into a conversation about their own lives. My book-sharing club soon morphed into a platform for stories, each meeting blossoming into lively discussions, not just about literature, but about dreams, fears, and the legacy we all carry. It became a reminder that each person's journey was valid, rich with the complexities that formed their tapestry of experiences. I initiated sharing circles where everyone could voice their stories, reinforcing the idea that we are not alone in our journeys and that a community can foster the healing power of connection. As I reflect on my journey so far, I see how downsizing ultimately rekindled a flame inside of me, a flame that had dimmed beneath layers of material possessions and emotional weight. I not only transformed my living environment, but also reignited my spirit, finding joy in simplicity and community engagement. In this space, I learned that home is not confined to a location, but is where love, laughter, and stories thrive. It's a reminder that we can always redefine our environment to encapsulate the very essence of who we are. Are you ready to take the reins